Not too many weeks ago, I was having a conversation with a man I consider to be one of my very good friends. And I was comforting him. He was sad. And the reason he was sad was because his wife left. And by leaving, what I mean to say is, she told him he was going to be served with papers in the next 20 minutes. Whew. And what he said was he's just going to wait patiently, see if she's willing to go to counseling, and he was going to try his very best to work it out because he believed very much in his marriage vows. I said, whoa, wait. Go back. Did you say she served you with papers while she was there and you were there? Yes, I did. Okay. Well, what I know is if a woman has served her husband with divorce papers, she's probably not up for trying to work on much. Working on things happens when you yell and you scream, or you are infuriated, or you say, "You've got to be kidding me. You didn't. What? Why do you always?" Calmly announcing that you're going to be served with papers, that's a whole different thing. Anytime she's already gone through the work of going to the courts, filling out papers and filing them, she's finished with that relationship. And if I could have asked her, I feel like the answer would have been, it didn't matter what I say. He didn't listen. No matter how many times I said it, he still wouldn't listen. So I asked my friend, I said, what was it you think was happening? He said, well, she said that I just didn't meet her emotional needs. I said, well, what did you think that meant? He said, I don't know. I think she just meant that I didn't tell her nice things enough. Okay, fair. I said, I got a question for you. When the two of you would have an argument or a discussion, I want you to think about how it ended. And this is incredibly important because having discussions, having arguments, having an interaction, that's life and that's normal. But what happens for her is different than what happens for him. So can I tell you a story? Can I tell you an experiment out of UCLA? He said, of course. I said, it went like this. Researchers called in hundreds of couples who agreed to be a part of this experiment. And in the experiment, they told them, here's what you can expect. So we're going to have you read from a script that we all prepared and wrote. You're going to read your part. The other will read theirs. And it's an argument. It's a simulated argument. We wrote it for you. The reason we want you to read the argument is we want to see what happens to your brainwaves. We want to know what happens to your heart rate. We want to know what happens to your respiration when you are having a simulated argument. They agreed. They've got their electrodes. They've got their cuffs on. They go into the room. What they told him was, we're going to have you read, and once you get to a certain point, you're going to hear a ping. At that point, he is going to be instructed to get up and leave the vicinity of the experiment. What I'm about to tell you is today called the door slamming effect. That if he removes himself from the area she's sitting in, he's effectively slammed the door on her. What they wanted to know was, what happens when you have a pretend argument? What happens when he leaves and he slams the door? Sure enough, they go in, they have their pretend argument, and they did not have a pretend heart rate increase. They did not have a pretend change in their brainwaves and neural communication. The changes happened as if they were really having an argument. Somewhere 10, 12, however many minutes into it, that both of them have a physiological response. They hear the ping, the male leaves the vicinity, at which time they check his information, and his brain waves and his heart rate and his respiration quickly return to his baseline rate. He recovers. Physiologically, he goes back to his baseline. Yeah, recover. Meanwhile, On the other side of this virtual door, after having a pretend argument with a pretend script that the researchers made up, her heart rate, her respiration, her brainwaves went through the roof. What? They absolutely went through the roof. A pretend argument. His being instructed to please leave the room in that event had a completely opposite effect on his brain and body as it did her brain and body. From this, we can glean, well, first of all, maybe we should all be trained on the differences between the male brain and the female brain. And I promise you, I write about it exclusively in detail in my book. That's the first chapter, Sex Differences in the Male and the Female Brain, where I promise to explain many of those differences. But here is the question that my friend asked me. He turned around and said, well, why didn't anybody tell me that? I said, tell you what? He said, why didn't anybody tell me that if I left an argument, she was going to go through the roof? He said, sometimes I just need to leave the room so I can calm down and I can think about it later. You know, my dear, I have absolutely no idea why nobody told you not to leave when someone was angry. But it wouldn't have occurred to me. I wouldn't have thought about the fact that it doesn't occur to you that if I'm upset, you don't leave. Some of these things that just seem like common sense are only common sense if you're standing in the middle of that gender. So it's entirely possible that if you're a female, it makes perfect sense that you don't walk out when your friend is mad. To a male, that doesn't make perfect sense. What does that mean? What is the training? Does she get her way? Does he have to stay? Does he get his way? Do they part ways? I'm not even sure that the answer is that difficult. The answer may be something in between. Maybe you don't have to establish what the rules are, but just understanding ahead of time that leaving an argument makes one person feel like they're being deserted. Now that goes into a study by Shelley Taylor in Southern California at UCLA. What they were looking at was the effects of a spouse, in particular it was a male spouse, when they worked out of town. So commuting husbands, that's what they were looking at. They wanted to know what kind of an effect it has on their wife when they leave behind. What they did was had them come in, again, like the last, they did a cheek swab because they wanted to know what happened to their norepinephrine levels. They wanted to know what happened to their cortisol. What happens to a female? What happens to the wife's stress level when the male leaves town and has to go on a business trip? Well, when he leaves town for the next 3 days, for the next 72 hours, she has an increased level of cortisol and an increased level of norepinephrine. Increased level of stress for her. What could that even be about? Well, we have to turn back to evolutionary psychologists. In particular, researcher Joy Berenson offers the explanation for thousands of years ago, even 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, a female's viability depended on, is she in a support group? Is there a network? Will there be people who can help to take care of her? Is there someone who can bring food? Is there someone who can help with offspring? Is there someone who can help to protect? A female is dependent on a social group for her success. Males are less dependent. And as a result, when a female goes out of town, the male's stress level does not go through the roof for 72 hours. On the other hand, for the female brain, it's an unconscious response to his leaving. Because what she is unconsciously, this is what a lot of the research is suggesting, that she unconsciously believes that she's being deserted. For a female, for a woman, in fact, starting at a very young age, social rejection. So when a girl's friends are unkind or mean, when a boy's going to break up, when a woman has a fight or an argument with friends or is worried about the boyfriend breaking up. That is the most stressful event to happen for a female neurologically. Of all the events studied today, the threat of social rejection is the most stressful for a female brain. The same is not true for a male. What they found for the male is the most stressful event for him is the loss of a job, is a threat to his success. Why? Well, because for a male, if he can't protect the family, that is a huge amount of stress. If he can't take care of himself and offer food and shelter to the family, huge amount of stress, which is why the loss of a job and unemployment is potentially devastating. And more than 60% of the time, if he is out of a job for more than 3 weeks, he is facing a almost guaranteed path to depression or anxiety or substance use. Well, what does this do for us? What does this mean? That idea that females are stressed out by relationship stress. What does it mean that males are stressed out by losing a job? Well, I think what it means is colossal. I think it means every single one of us have to understand the difference between the male and the female brain. And when it comes to relationships, when it comes to how we're going to interact, this is a really, really important thing to know. So going to the door slamming finding that when he gets up and leaves an argument, while he calms down, she goes through the roof, understanding that it's unconsciously communicating with her that she's being abandoned. At very least, allows both people in the relationship to consider, well, maybe he's leaving so he can calm down. And when he comes back, we can work this out. And maybe he's considering, I understand, she thinks that I'm leaving and never coming back. This isn't the end of the relationship. And having a conversation ahead of time. This is how we're going to handle it when this happens. Or if he does have to leave the room, he does have to leave the house and go for a drive, fine, go for the drive. But say these words, I need to go for a drive. I'm going to drive around for about 15 minutes, pull together my thoughts, and I will be back to have a conversation with you. I'll be back. What would that do for her heart rate? What would that do for her neurology? Well, if we're to consider the study done by Shelley Taylor in UCLA on the 72 hours that a female has an increased level of stress when her husband leaves on a business trip for 3 days, she has a higher level of stress. Well, what the researchers were looking at is, how can we maybe calm that stress back down? Is it possible? In their follow-up, what they had them do was they had the spouse, the husband who was traveling. In one group, they called their wife and had a conversation. In one group, they texted. And in one group, they emailed. The email group and the texting group had no impact. What they found with the phone group, with the telephone, with real time, was a husband who called his wife and had a positive conversation, which was reassuring. I know you're really busy. I know you have to do all the responsibilities. That has to be hard for you. If he was reassuring and said things like, I'll be home in 2 days, I'll be home in a little while, her stress level recovered almost during and at the moment of the reassuring phone call. Quick, fast, simple, doesn't cost a cent. But if you don't know that you're going on a trip and need to do some reassuring, look at the damage. Look at things that could go wrong. Very simple little conversational tips for a male and a female. Because for females, she has to have social support or her viability is in question. She is threatened at the concept of losing a relationship because in reality, males seem to be able to, well, they can hunt on their own and they can feed themselves on their own. For a female, she has to have help. And especially once a female has a baby, has to have help. That's why having a social network is incredibly important. Having good friends you can count on, having a mom, having an aunt, having an auntie for the offspring to keep that stress down and help to take care of her. She has to have that. Understanding that physiology, of course, completely fascinates me, and I had to dig further. Turns out, you ready for this? I think we can account for almost every single one of our male and female differences by reading the answer to a poll that was done a number of years ago. The poll was, what are you looking for in a friend? That's it. It's huge. The result in my mind can potentially close academic gaps. That boys don't have to be 2 to 4 years behind girls in school. That females don't have to be the minority in math-dominated fields. We can potentially, by understanding these differences, can potentially make such massive changes in our society based on the answers to the question, what are you looking for in a friend? You ready? Girls answered, females answered, women answered. I'm looking for someone I can talk to and spend time with. I want to talk. I want to share my thoughts. I want to share my emotions. What are you feeling? What am I feeling? I want to vent. I want to talk about things I love. I want to talk and talk and talk and talk and spend time talking. Keeping that in mind, and think about how that fits into the concept of females are dependent on a good social skill, a good social network. Males are too. Again, keeping in mind that in the last 150 to 100 years that things have changed so that women have a different skill set, so women can take care of herself. She doesn't have to have a male to take care of her. But centuries and centuries and centuries and millennia ago, she did. She was dependent. So keeping that in mind, when you go back to the meaning of answering, what is it you look for in a friend? That meaning takes on a whole new importance. Because when a female is looking for someone to talk to, it fits in perfectly. Females have to use language. Girls use language. Women use language. It's her tool to make sure her network is close, connected, happy, reading the emotions, meeting the needs. Meanwhile, when boys were asked the same question, when men were asked the same question, what are you looking for in a friend? He said, someone to do something with. There it is. That's it. That's the end of the story. It's the mystery. I want to do something. Let's go. Let's go hike. Let's go play golf. Let's go climbing. Let's go to a fill in the blank. He wants to do. He is looking for activity. So confusing high energy males is quite common. Confusing high energy males with attention deficits, or living in a world where the majority of our males, especially young males, are living in a world where they are told, sit still, be still, you have to listen. Listen, sit still, be still, you have to listen. It was about 10 years ago, I was in a second grade class. I walked in, I was observing, and this teacher was discussing something about math. She said, I will only call on you if you are listening to me. Wasn't exactly sure what that meant, but she began calling on student after student. It was female after female. What she was looking for was, are your eyes looking at me? Fast forward 20 minutes, 30 minutes after they had all sat quietly where they were supposed to be still and they were supposed to listen, which was make eye contact. Making eye contact is code for listening. She said, okay, well, it's time for recess, and I will dismiss you based on which ones of you are actually listening to me. And it was kind of gut-wrenching because half of the room left immediately and the other half sat and waited, and the last two, possibly most active boys, sat there for a very long time until they realized they had to look at the teacher and maintain eye contact before they were going to be allowed to go for recess, where they would be able to move, be active, and do something, which takes us back to what I think is probably the essential difference between a male and a female. What are you looking for in a friend? I want someone I can talk to. What are you looking for in a friend? I want someone I can do something with. Now consider what that means for marriage. Consider what that means in a relationship. That it's entirely possible that she enjoys talking and interacting about things like emotions. And that is nothing males seem to be looking for, at least when they're asked over and over. That doesn't seem to come up as something that males are looking for. I just want to sit and talk and listen and have conversations and talk about my feelings. Just doesn't seem to come up for a male. Brings us to the difference in definitions of what it means to listen. Why aren't you listening to me? Because guess what? Science has shown us that in controlled studies, when boys are asked to have a conversation, they stand differently. They look in a different area. Females are told to have a conversation. They stand differently. They look differently. I got to tell you the study. I love it. I love it. I love it because I told this research one time. I was at a conference. It was a business conference. And I'm speaking to groups of professionals and college professors. And as soon as I finished telling the story, 3 of the college professors came to me, almost charged me, which made me so happy. They come running to me and said, how did you know that? How did you know that? I said, how did I know what? They said, how did you know that's exactly what we do? Pause. Here was the research. Here was the study. 20,000 boys, young men, 3rd graders, 8th graders, 12th graders, 22-year-olds, and 32-year-olds, okay, asked to do this. We want you to talk about something important. Now, the researchers had arranged it so that only boys were in the room and only girls in the room, and what they wanted to know was how do they interact? What they found was when they asked them to do something, they asked them to talk about something important. That was it. That was their question. We need you to talk about something important. They began looking to see where the boys went, how the boys had a conversation, where the girls went, then again, the adult females. Here's what they found. They weren't really looking at what do you think is important. They were looking at what do males do when faced with a person in a position of authority. What do males do when someone tells them what to do? Now, I would never have thought about this, but it turns out the definition of telling someone what to do is position of authority. So when the researchers said, please go stand with that group of young men or that group of young women and talk about something important, that was, I guess, bossy. They were telling them what to do. The person was in a position of authority. Mothers have to do this all the time. Teachers have to do this all the time. Bosses do this all the time. Politicians need to pay close attention to this. When males are told what to do, here's what they found. When the males went to have the conversation about something important, first thing researchers took note of is they don't close their circle. They stand at a 45-degree angle. They were standing shoulder to shoulder. They were also looking at, what are they looking at? What they found was young and older men were all looking at the speaker about 50% of the time. He looked at his environment, scanned the room. So he was looking around the room about half of the time and looking at the speaker about half the time the speaker was saying what was important. So where they were standing, their physical response, I think, is incredibly important. That was how males were listening to each other. They were standing shoulder to shoulder, looking around the room 50% of the time, looking at the speaker 50% of the time. So consider this. Does it make sense, or would it have made sense 100,000 years ago? Would it have made sense for a male to scan his environment, to look around? What is over there? Is there something over that hill? Is there something coming towards us? Is there someone coming toward us? Is he scanning his environment for a threat? Possibly. So what did they do once they get into their group and they're talking about something important? Number one thing males did was say that this is a really stupid thing to have to do. This is really dumb. I can't believe we have to. This is a stupid thing that we're doing. So number one, males insult the command, the request, which is a way of giving pushback to the authority. Person who tells them what to do, everyone in the group gives them a, that's so stupid. Number two, after they insulted, said how stupid the task was they were just told to do, they did it. Their topic, interestingly enough, was a verb. Let's go out to reset. Well, when we're done, we should go ride our bikes. What do you guys think of? Well, I think it's important that people go fishing. I think people should go. So for males, what was important was something verb related, going and doing something, action. When they were done, number three thing the male did after he was told what to do, standing in a circle, doesn't close the circle, makes eye contact 50% of the time, standing shoulder to shoulder. The male insults the activity, then the male comes up with, oh, we need to go do this, or doing things. Those seem to be the things that are very important. And the third thing they did was they turned and insulted one another. When they were in third grade, the insult was verbal as well as physical, which means a shove or a push or a punch. It's one of an elementary school teacher's favorite things when the boys begin punching each other. But it seemed to be the majority of males, after they did their task, they're now going to have some kind of a physical insult and a verbal. Dude, you're stupid. Dude, why would you do things like that? No. They get older. In 8th grade, they do the same. With one exception, they do not engage in the physical assault. Verbally, they still pick on each other. Dude, those are stupid. Why would you do that? At 22, they still insult each other. Verbally. Dude, you drive a Datsun. No, dude, that's just boy talk. They mean nothing by it. They just insult each other. And it's how they do. It's just boy banter. What I thought was interesting was at 32, they still did the verbal insult. But at 32, they went back to the physical insult. And the closer, the more physical. Brothers are the most violent when they get together. The pushing and the shoving. Best friends, pushing, shoving, taking down. They can't keep their hands off of each other. It seems to be that rough and tumble play, which is, of course, incredibly good for them. Not so popular with the teacher. I thought it was interesting in 3rd grade. They were still shoving, and at some point they quit. Meanwhile, what did the females do? First and foremost, when females were told, please talk about something important with your group, she closed the circle. That means she's toe-to-toe, she's eye-to-eye, she is making contact. If you are speaking, a female looks at you 100% of the time. Is this why females define listening as eye-to-eye contact? Are you looking at me? You're not looking at me. You need to be looking at me, otherwise you're not listening to me. Closes the circle, begins the conversation. For a female, first thing she did in her group, they talked about something important. It was the most common answer was always emotion. It was something that connected to an emotion. This is something sad. This is something scary, especially topics of death and losing someone who is important made the top of the list for females. When you're talking about a topic that's very, very important, that was number one. Number two was the female spent the majority of her time talking about, I don't know if I'm doing it right. I'm not sure that we had very good directions. I mean, I'm not really sure what she's looking for or he's looking for, depending on the person who was in a position of authority, right? That was the person who asked the question. I didn't think the directions were very good. The female went to look for clarity in order to please the person in a position of authority. Okay, let that roll around for just a second. Think about that second grade room, boys and girls. That teacher, who, by the way, was asked to retire the following year after a number of people had noticed that some of her behaviors for boys and girls were particularly difficult. It didn't include respecting both genders. Anyway, that teacher, what she had was half of the room who's waiting in line to ask her, am I doing this the way you wanted me to? I need to know, am I doing that right? Is this what I wanted to make sure this is right, because I just need to make sure that I don't get it wrong, because my life would be all wrong if I didn't get it right and make you happy. Not really, of course, I'm over exaggerating, but the truth is as long as your female is driven by the need to have a support group around her, it's incredibly important for that female to make sure that the people around her are being pleased. So a person in a position of authority, when she's speaking to her, he's speaking to a female. It's a whole different relationship. So that second grade teacher has half of the room who's dying to know that they're pleasing her and doing what she'd asked for. Am I following the directions? Because I don't know if I was following the directions. Could I have better directions? Would you clarify your directions? While the other half of the room isn't even looking at her. That's why I think every single parent, every single teacher, every single employer needs to be trained on the differences in the male and the female brain. Listening isn't necessarily looking in your eyes. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be training. When you are looking someone in the eyes, it makes them think you care. When you are actually looking at someone's face, having a conversation, you make them feel important. And wait, there's more. It turns out your brain increases endogenous opioids. Your brain increases dopamine levels when you were looking at a human face. So what does that mean? Well, if you remember, dopamine fuels your frontal cortex. If you remember, that means your ability to think, process, talk, have a conversation is improved by looking in someone's face. And it's good to know that the research shows us, the more you talk, the better you get at talking. The more you talk, the more you have that chemical that allows you to improve your ability to communicate. Written, verbal, auditory, it's just good for us. And it's an endogenous opioid. That's the stuff that makes us feel good. That's the stuff that alcohol mimics. Dopamine. Our brain thinks that we're increasing our dopamine. Increasing that dopamine could be and is key to allowing us to feel satisfaction in life. And it's entirely possible that because the average number of hours we stare into a phone, 5 hours, the average number of hours takes away the amount of time we used to look at a human face. That means we're not increasing our endogenous opioids with FaceTime, with having dinner, where you're not looking at a phone, where you're looking at the person you're having a conversation with. Just understanding that listening looks different for him than it does for her. And training, what does it mean to listen to someone? Could save relationships, improve intelligence, allow people to feel better and not be more prone to use a substance. What I'd like to know are your stories and experiences. When I pick this topic up again next, let's talk about interruption. Males have a different relationship with interrupting in a conversation, as do females. You see, females will talk with you while you talk, and it means she's highly engaged. Males don't think that. In the meantime, take care, good luck, see you soon.